I've heard that the best graduation speeches are short and humorous. Everyone else has promised you the humor. I'm going to try and be short. After listening to Dave's list, I know that all of you realize what a truly special place Champlain College is. It promises a radically pragmatic education, and it challenges all of you with that Latin word, audeamus, let us dare. I'm here to tell you a story about daring and what it means to be relevant today while being years ahead of your time. I listened to all of the degrees that Champlain offers that involve technology, gaming, collaboration, and there were times when very few people in the world truly understood that this was essential, and it wasn't essential tomorrow, it was essential today. Back in 1993, the year that many of you were born, CERN, the particle physics lab near Geneva, Switzerland, released its newly developed World Wide Web network of computers. And anybody could use that web on a royalty-free basis. This radical idea that changed communication as we know it today had actually been proposed by Tim Berners-Lee roughly 5 years beforehand, but it took those intervening years for even the most advanced scientific community to catch on to its significance. Around that same time, Andy Grove, who was then the president of Intel, spoke to a macromedia users conference in San Francisco about a crisis in computing. Andy flashed these charts and graphs on a large screen, and he was really upset. He complained that only 15% of the population knew how to use computers, and because of that, his business and many others were in jeopardy of failing. Our country was faced with an educational challenge, not just in schools, but throughout the population at large. As I listened to Andy's words, I was elated and also fear-struck. I wondered whether the need to sell his computers would drive our education policy for years to come. And I thought, if it does, I really want to help shape its use in ways that revive the soul rather than restrict the mind. The task to learn and to educate was immense. I think of it as equivalent to the introduction of electricity, something equally relevant in its day and yet years ahead of its time. No one needs prompting anymore about the value of electrification or how to develop creative uses for it. But in its day, the UVM Extension Service actually produced pamphlets spread around Vermont telling people or trying to convince them of the value of electricity and inviting them to invent new uses for it. In the early 1990s, we had a similar challenge, a challenge to develop creative users whose visions extended beyond the imagination of the scientific communities that had developed that original hardware and software. As one Adobe developer said to me, I helped develop this software, but I have no idea of its full capacity. To me, this comment foreshadowed a truth that most of us readily accept today, and that is that no one can know everything about anything. This is why collaborative inquiry, creativity, and critical thinking are so important. By 1995, the Clinton administration heeded the tech industry's challenge for a massive education campaign, and Congress appointed its first millions to education technology. The thinking then was that if NASA, the CIA, the National Science Foundation, and the Department of Defense worked together to help the US Department of Education, good things would happen and technology would spread, right? This is my only joke. I'm sure you can already guess that led to chaos and not a lot of cooperation. Needless, 19 innovation projects were funded. The mission of the program was to help the government figure out innovative ways to use technology in education. To understand like the full impact of this, you would have to imagine a world that knew nothing about what affects all of your lives on a daily basis. We didn't know, we didn't understand possibility. At this time, I was involved in a statewide arts assessment initiative, and I wanted to connect everyone through telecommunications. Back then, AOL only had 250,000 users, and I was troubleshooting new users, posing questions like, is your computer turned on? And more often than I'd like to admit, they didn't have their computers plugged in, right? So fortunately, most people don't ask that question anymore because we really have come a long way. For me, technology was always about its use value. I didn't pay a lot of attention to the nuts and bolts of the stuff unless it served some immediate purpose. So when the techies who really knew the stuff but didn't know what to do with it would say, well, what kind of computer do you have? What version of your software do you have? I got pretty bored because although I understood it was necessary, I see those questions as irrelevant to function. What are you gonna do? So anyway, there were issues that arose from the Arts Assessment Project, especially with the visual arts and music. And I saw emerging advances in technology as promising to help push these groups into more reflective and creative realms. So the small business-based multimedia computers that blazed at 66 megahertz looked like a really good deal to me. And I saw that it could help artists and musicians use their visual and oral languages to directly converse about the quality of work. Again, I want to remind you what things were like. We tried this experiment where there were music compositions from kids in Vermont were being exchanged and discussed with these musicians and composers in Paris. But the people in Paris had never used the internet either, and they didn't compose with computers, they composed with paper and pencil. So we were literally training everybody all the time. So based on this track record, I worked with some people to submit an application for one of those 19 innovations, and the web project was born. The goals that we had of increasing student learning in the arts and humanities through multimedia and telecommunication sound like no-brainers now, but in their day, they were pretty, not radical, they were considered impossible. Somebody from the Vermont Department of Ed said, oh, Fern, that idea is 50 years ahead of its time. You're not going to see that happen. And I kept saying, look, I'm experimenting with this stuff on the top of Putney Mountain. I know it can work. To illustrate the lay of the land, Vermont had only one T1 line, which is considered slow today, in the entire state. And it didn't go to UVM. It went to Main Street Middle School in Montpelier because one of the teachers there was experimenting with Apple's Global Schoolhouse. My CD burner had a serial number of 75. And when I went to find out more information about this thing called burning a CD, they told us, well, don't get too attached to it because in 4 years we're going to come out with something we're calling DVD. Which raises the question, why do you learn all of this stuff if it becomes obsolete? And again, that gets back to purpose. And Ann DeMarle, your Associate Dean of Emergent Media, was one of very few people in Vermont who knew how to use Photoshop. Imagine that. Ann and a couple of other people could use Photoshop, and to the rest of the state, it was a giant mystery. Well, with this barren landscape, I walked into my first year of technology innovation, and I got some pretty rude awakenings. No teacher at the training session had ever used a computer, let alone communicated online. So rather than go ahead with these lofty goals, we needed to start by saying, this is how you open your box. This is how you plug in your computer. The artist groups, they were no better than the teachers. They thought that technology was going to ruin arts. They were really opposed to it. The national groups wouldn't let me use digital art. They wouldn't recognize it. Now we can't really think about art without thinking about digital stuff. Vermont's state media competitions wouldn't allow us to enter our multimedia products. They said, no, media means video. So we had to build positive and compelling examples to pave the way. And we did do that, but to move an entire state and to add to the national knowledge base took teamwork, and it took the ingenuity of all involved as we experimented, tried, failed, and improved. We kept what worked, and we discarded the rest. By the end, our efforts paid off, and we received those awards that you've already heard about. So, how does a creative doer accomplish dreams that are radically pragmatic, relevant to the needs of the day, and yet years ahead of their time? My solution was to look for people and institutions who wanted to see more than 256 colors offered by the educational software at the time. The people and the business partners were easier to find than the institutions. When someone gets an idea, more often than not, that idea isn't brand new. Someone else is also thinking and doing along the same lines. And there are always companies developing solutions to problems that they themselves haven't identified. I turned to small tech companies, and now they're all gobbled up by Adobe, and user groups for inspiration, and to other cultures to extend my way of thinking. Finding a partner institution of higher ed was another matter. It was very, very difficult because higher ed is not known for flexibility and agility. Luckily for me, Anne DeMarle, one of the web project artists, had just been hired by Champlain. Anne was so excited by the fresh ideas and flexibility of the college that she invited me to campus. I couldn't believe what I saw, an institution that understood how to create inspirational environments for learning, and how to grasp the future that is here now, and how to utilize a well-rounded education for radically pragmatic purposes. At the end of the 5-year federally funded portion of the web project, I was still concerned about whether or not our processes could maintain the creative and aesthetic sensibility that we had begun. Many of our innovations handed over to other groups had already fallen back into pedantic versions of their former selves, 256 colors of possibility rather than millions. So to continue the legacy of fresh and innovative uses of technology, I looked to Champlain College. In 2000, we held a joint web project, Champlain College Vital Learn Conference called Dynamic Landscapes, which is now going into its 15th year, and I hear it will be hosted by Champlain next week. To this day, your college serves as a beacon for the meaning of relevant today and years ahead of its time. You're graduating at another time of change, invisible to most, including me, but obvious to those with fresh ideas and a keen awareness of what's possible. Actualizing the possible takes determination, perseverance, and a willingness to work collaboratively with like-minded people who bring different perspectives and skill sets. New ideas are not immediately successful. Imagine the big picture, but don't let its complexities overwhelm you. You'll make many mistakes before seeing what you dream come to fruition. As you continue your journeys, remember the lessons you learned here and become creative doers who view your opportunities through millions of colors. Remember the college's motto, Audeamus, let us dare. And congratulations to all of you.